Hello, GLC attendees, and welcome to Supporting Libraries Through Advocacy. Thank you for joining this session today. My name is Angela Glowcheski, and I am the current GLA Advocacy Committee Chair. The Advocacy Committee exists within GLA to serve as the liaison between GLA and the legislative bodies of local, state, and national governments. Outside of GLA, I serve as the Deputy Director for the Sequoia Regional Library System, which is made up of 7 branches in the counties of Cherokee, Pickens, and Gilmer. I hope you all came to this session ready to kickstart your advocacy efforts. Whether this is your first time really focusing on advocacy training, or maybe you consider yourself an advocacy expert, no matter where you are on the scale, my hope is that you are able to walk away from this session with one next step, one thing, one tip that you can act on and advocate for your library. In this session, we will discuss briefly the importance and value of advocacy. I like to think you all already know the value, and that's why you came to this session, but it is important for us to build that foundation. We will also hear from Alan Fischel about the ease of libraries, a public awareness campaign that can help us talk about our libraries. Alan will also discuss one of the hurdles we face in advocating for libraries, which is the reality perception gap. And then we will close with some of the ways GLA advocates for our libraries and other tools for you to explore. Let's start with talking about what is advocacy and why we become advocates. Advocacy is planned, deliberate, and sustained efforts to raise awareness of an issue, specifically for our libraries, where individuals act on behalf of the library. When we advocate for the library, we are advocating for library need. It's essential to a library's success for advocacy to be part of the everyday. In a rapidly changing world, library advocates must work harder than ever to make clear the relevance and importance of our spaces. In a world where information is bite-sized and intake is limited, advocates must strategically craft messages that engage and are concise. Moving to the who and why. Who advocates for our libraries? Whose job is it to advocate? The best answer to me is anyone who believes in what libraries do and the value created by libraries in a community. Each advocate, whether a patron or a staff member, elected official or board member, have a unique perspective and are able to engage with different audiences in different ways. When your audience is made up of elected officials, it may be that the best advocate to have sharing your message is an elected official. And when it comes to crafting that message, knowing who your advocates are is important because they can help address the "what's in it for me" mentality that advocates must play to when creating a message and a call to action. Your audience wants to know, what's in it for me? Why should I care? And the advocate, you and your message, has to be able to quickly communicate that and deliver the call to action. The ask of the audience. Why should they care? And what do you want them to do about it? This is not easy, but very possible with planning and strategies. Why become an advocate for libraries? This is where advocacy has to move beyond financial support. We are always asking for funds, but that's not why we advocate. It is often what we are seeking: funds, financial support, financial stability, but the why is key. And for me, the why, my why, keeps advocacy from becoming taxing, because it is. It can wear on you to appeal to the same legislative bodies, local or national, to support your library. It can be and feel never-ending. That's the whys help sustain us in our energies. Why do you advocate? Perhaps you advocate because you believe libraries are central to a healthy and informed community. Maybe you advocate because in your local government, the decision makers are not the primary users of your library. You may advocate because in your position, you have been able to connect patrons to jobs, sustained employment that allowed them to feed their families. Maybe you know that decisions made by legislators impact more than just libraries, and you advocate for privacy and intellectual freedom. I encourage you after this session to spend some time thinking about why you advocate. Why do you devote time to library advocacy efforts? I'm excited today to be sharing this session with Alan Fischel. Alan serves on the United for Libraries board. He is the co-author of the book, Proving Your Library's Value: Persuasive, Organized, and Memorable Messaging, available through ALA. He is also the chair of the Ease of Libraries Task Force, an advocacy campaign. I really appreciate Alan's time and his willingness to share with us today.
Angela, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with the Georgia Library Association Conference. My name is Alan Fischel, and we're here today to talk about the ease of libraries. And so, of course, the first thing is, what do we mean by the ease of libraries? And we're really referring to 5 different categories of things that libraries do. So they get involved with education, with employment, with entrepreneurship, with empowerment, and engagement. And the reason we're going to talk about these today is because of advocacy, and how do you best advocate to people who aren't as close to the library industry and what libraries do as we are. And so that's what I wanted to discuss today, and how the ease of libraries can work to make advocacy much more beneficial to you and frankly, much more successful. So the first thing to really talk about is the reality perception gap with respect to libraries. One of the reasons that libraries often struggle when they're dealing with external people with respect to how it's working and how the advocacy is working is because of what I like to think of as the reality perception gap. And what this is on a scale of essential to nice to have to obsolete, there's no question in reality libraries are essential. In fact, they're not just essential in one way, they're essential in many ways, including with respect to all 5 of the E's that I referenced on the prior page, meaning education, employment, entrepreneurship, empowerment, and engagement. Libraries are essential in every one of these. And there are a lot of people out there who believe libraries are essential as to many things, or at least one thing. But unfortunately, there are also many people who don't have that view, and who view libraries as either something that's not essential, but kind of a nice to have sort of thing, or even worse, some people view libraries as being obsolete, that, this was the past. And so the question really comes from this, when you think about it, why does the reality perception gap exist at all? So why do we have this, where we have libraries that are essential in so many different ways, and yet we have a lot of people that don't realize that? And there's really 2 primary reasons for the reality perception gap. And the first of those is the past perceptions of libraries that people have and that still linger. And what I mean by that is, if you started a new company tomorrow, a startup, nobody would have a perception about it. No one would have a thought of what it was or how it worked. But people have strong perceptions about libraries. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about that creates the reality perception gap. And the second reason is libraries do not have one dominant activity, sort of like the one primary thing they do more than anything else by far. And we're going to talk about that as well. And those 2 reasons, as we're going to discuss, are really the reason we have the reality perception gap we still have. And so first I want to talk about the past perception hurdle. Many people view libraries based on what they remember, sometimes when they were a child, which could be 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they believe libraries are a really good place to borrow a book from, but now that's not nearly as necessary given, everything that the internet has. And a lot of people feel that, libraries are just generally a provider of information, and anything you need can be found online. In fact, I can't tell you how often when I introduce some of my library friends and people I know and work with to others, the first thing the others say, the people outside the library community tend to say is, "Oh my gosh, I remember when I got my first library card when I was 8 years old or 7 or 9. They're always thinking back to that. And so they have this perception that we've got to overcome. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about here today. And just a lot of people have that because they want to think of what they first learned about libraries, which in some cases could be literally half a century ago, and in other cases could still be 20, 30, 40 years ago. The other thing is the lack of one dominant activity. So, with schools, what do we think of? Schools are essential. Schools educate. We know it. If you said to anybody, what is the school's number one purpose by far? Education. Same with hospitals, although it's obviously a different number one purpose. Hospitals heal. And so therefore, if you ask people, are schools essential? Virtually everyone is going to say yes. If you ask people, are hospitals essential? Virtually everyone is going to say yes. They have this one dominant activity. Libraries don't. Libraries have so many things they're great at, but it's not one dominant activity like schools or like hospitals. And therefore, it can be harder to convince people that libraries are essential because they're not focusing on one core activity. So the question becomes, how do we effectively address those hurdles? Because these hurdles exist, and it's just like anything else in life. If you've got hurdles, you have to A, recognize them, and then B, figure out how to address them, or otherwise they're just not going to go away. And so here, messaging that libraries use that does not address those hurdles, even though it may be a really feel-good messaging, even though it may be messaging that's great for internal distribution, libraries are great, libraries are special, whatever it may be, that can be great messaging to feel really good internally, but it's not going to generally be effective messaging externally. Because externally, people are not going to just listen to conclusory messages that libraries are great. People that have these past perception hurdle, or that have the fact that they think, well, libraries have really been overtaken by the internet and the like. Just telling them, no, 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 you're wrong, libraries are great, is not going to convince them. It's not going to change their mindset. They're still going to think they're obsolete or nice to have. So you need messaging that does more than just has a conclusion to it. It has to have a way of convincing people that the hurdles, that the reasons they're thinking that libraries are not essential is actually incorrect. And so that's what we're going to address today. So it's very intentional, because here's the truth. And I've been advocating for over 30 years. And I can tell you that if you advocate in a way that is really, really persuasive in your mind, I mean, you're buying into it, you believe it totally, but not in theirs, it simply won't work. I've seen this over and over and over again by people. They're so convinced of their own arguments, but they're not translating over to the people they're trying to convince. What I always think of with this is the two hurdles that we have that libraries need to overcome in order to address the reality perception gap are a lot like, by analogy, if you want to think about it, they're very much like a door with two deadbolts. And so, you have two options. If I gave you a key that opened both of those deadbolts, you would have two options, right? One would be use the key, unlock the deadbolts, and just open the door. The other would be bang on the door and bang on the door and bang on the door. Option one is going to work because it addresses the hurdles. The hurdles are the two deadbolts. Option two isn't going to work because it's not addressing the hurdles. So what we need to do with the advocacy is make sure our advocacy is addressing those hurdles so that people will listen to what we're saying. So I think the bottom line here is, when you're thinking about advocacy, the key is not to tell them what you want to say, what you're planning to say, what you're thinking is great to say. No. Always think about, what is it that they need to know? So the bottom line is, that's the way you want to look at it. I still remember being involved, and I do a lot of work, representing clients in front of the Federal Communications Commission. I remember being in an appellate hearing, and my side had won at the lower level, the FCC, and the other side was making arguments to the court, and I thought they were really weak. But I happened to be walking out of the room at the same time the other side was, and I could see that their arguments had not resonated at all with the court. And one of the people was asking the person who argued for the other side, they said, how do you think it went? He goes, oh, it went great. It went perfectly. I told him just what I wanted to say. Well, I think they lost in record time on that appeal, or close to record time, because he didn't at all resonate with them at all, anything he said. And so therefore, the key is not that you feel good about what you said, but that you feel good about telling them what they needed to know. That is the key in advocacy. So with the past perception hurdle, once people become familiar, and this is how the ease of libraries is going to start getting us involved. Once people become familiar in a persuasive, but I mean persuasive to them way, memorable and organized way, with the category of activities that libraries are involved, which categories, by the way, these E's, education, employment, entrepreneurship, and so forth, everyone agrees it's essential. Nobody in this country that I'm aware of, or virtually no one, would say education's not essential, doesn't matter if you're educated, employment's not essential, doesn't matter if anyone's employed. Nobody says that. But once you can convince people in a persuasive, but it's got to be memorable, because they can't just forget it 10 seconds later, an organized way, why libraries are essential, that changes the dynamic. And in fact, the irony is that libraries are so great at so many things that, as I mentioned before, that can become the lack of one dominant activity hurdle and undermine the ability to be persuasive unless you use the right messaging. And here, with the ease of libraries, it can turn by saying, no, we are essential in so many different ways with respect to education, employment, entrepreneurship, engagement, and empowerment. It can take what is a negative in terms of messaging, which is lack of one dominant activity, and actually turn it into a positive. So once again, just to remind you what the 5 E's are right now, it's education, employment, entrepreneurship, empowerment, and engagement. And I just want to go back to when I started doing work with the library so many years ago. I was trying to get a handle on what libraries did, and what was making it so hard for me was that so many people were telling me, Alan, libraries are great at connecting. Alan, libraries are great at this, 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 and this. And my head was spinning. It was so many different people saying it in so many different ways, with so much different language, with different criteria, different categories, different ways of looking at it. I couldn't assimilate it. As soon as you start to say, no, if you break it down into categories like these 5 and start putting things under the categories, everything changes because it becomes organized. It's almost like you have a room that was completely cluttered with so much great stuff in there, and then all of a sudden you put it in an organized fashion, like we're doing here in advocacy and putting it under these points. So what we did, and I'm on the board of United for Libraries, and what we have done is we got a task force together to say, okay, we've got these 5 E's, but what is it? Because that's not enough by itself to say words like education. What is it under each of these E's we do? And so what we started doing as a baseline, and this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but started to do as a baseline is what we call the 3x3s, meaning for each of the 5 categories, we came up with 3 key points. And then under that, we put 3 subcategories under that. So with education, we did it by age. So we broke it down into what do libraries do for early childhood learning, what do they do for K-12 education, and what do they do for adult education? And so that's how we looked at it. And then we started breaking it down into 3 categories under early childhood learning, which you can see just looking at the screen, and then 3 categories for K-12, and then 3 categories for adult education. So with education, as I say, we broke it down by age, but we didn't always do it that way for the other categories. So when you look at like the next category, for example, employment, we broke it down by the step in the process. Okay, so you're looking for a job. What are the steps? Well, the first step is self-evaluation. What is it you like? What is it you have the skills to do? I mean, you might want to be, a astronaut, but if you don't have any skills that would meet up with that, that's not going to get you there. So it's a self-evaluation at first, and then it's a skill building. It doesn't mean you have to have all the skills, but if you already have something that you sort of incline to, now you can do skill building. And then of course it's finding and landing the job. And underneath this, we have the 3 bullet points underneath each of these. Just as sub bullet points for 3 under self-evaluation, 3 under skill building, and 3 under finding and landing the job. Entrepreneurship is similar to employment in the way we broke it down, in that, again, we looked at it by the process. So first would be, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur. What are areas of interest exploration? And then the libraries can help you not only with that, but also with facilitating connections. And then even after that, they can help you identify resources for funding and growing your business. So they can play a role in all 3 of these. So what we're doing is putting meat to the bone. We're not just saying, here's 5 E's, but we're starting to describe things underneath each of these. Just moving on, so the next one is empowerment. And there we have the same concept, except now, instead of doing it by stage of the process, we're doing it by categories. So we broke it down into 3 important categories in empowerment: the financial technology and health literacy, empowering people. And this day and age with COVID, everything we have going on, that's even more important than ever, albeit it's always important. The civil and legal literacy, and of course, the support for underserved populations. And the final one is engagement. And we broke this down again into categories. Some of them are learning, all sorts of different things that it can be learning, whether it's cooking, whether it's maker spaces, whether it's educational competitions. Secondly, it's social, like the book clubs and the stuff like that, author visits. And the final one is community. It can be town halls. Obviously, we're coming up, in November with elections, both state, local, and national. And those can be great as well. So the libraries do all of that. So, okay, Alan, I hear what you're saying, but how does this all fit in with the advocacy? Well, here's how. Take a look at these 4 really important points. What you're doing is you're coming up with messaging that is understandable. Everybody understands what education is, what employment is, what entrepreneurship is, what engagement is, and what empowerment are. They understand it not just in the library community, they understand it outside the library community. Now we're speaking their language, not just our language, but their language. It's also things that are supportable. It's not just that they understand them, but people want to be donating funding, providing support, providing their time to things in education, in employment, in entrepreneurship, in empowerment, in engagement. And what's great about these is they're, as I mentioned earlier, they're all essential. There are things that are essential to our society, essential to our economy, essential to our well-being. And people get that. I don't have to ever go into a room and say, education is essential in this country. If I even said that, I would look like I'm saying something that is just so not profound. So you don't need to say that. And so when people start associating the ease of libraries, knowing these things are essential with libraries, and you start showing them what you're doing, it makes a ton of difference. And it's memorable. It's not one of those things that you just go in and people then forget it the second you leave. Because with advocacy, it's a couple things. It's, do I convince them when I'm in the room with them? And then are they still convinced when they leave, and do they still remember it later? I had a lot of people that when I first started working with ALA, and even before I started being on the board of United for Libraries, people would say, wow, why are you working for ALA? Libraries, aren't they out of date, or aren't they obsolete, or aren't they just nice to have at this point? And once I started explaining them the ease of libraries in a memorable way and what libraries do, the look on their face was priceless. It changed the dynamic entirely. And that's what this is about. Now, the internal advantages is it's a common language. As I said earlier, when I first started working with ALA, people were telling me so many different things in so many different ways that I couldn't understand it, and I really cared about understanding it. But if you can have this common language of the ease of libraries, it really, really changes things. It's also easy. They're easy to remember. They're easy to organize. They just make your life a whole lot easier. Now, the thing I want to say about advocacy, it's not like you're going into every meeting and you're going to be talking about all 5 of the ease of libraries and every subcategory at it. No need for that at all. What I wanted you to do is understand what the E's are, what subcategories can be under them. But what you're going to do if you have a presentation is, if you have a presentation with someone that only cares about K-12 education, then you're going to go in 100% prepared to talk about the ease of libraries. One of the E's is education, and one of the primary components of that is K-12 education, and then start talking about what your library does under that, what other libraries do, and what your library could do with more funding, more partnerships alike. Now, cautionary note is the last bullet point. You want to have in your back pocket that if you think they may be bringing up other things, maybe other education things, or even other things unrelated to education, relating to one of the other E's, you have that in your back pocket, so you're ready to go. So this gives you a comfort level, it gives you a confidence, you become organized, you're ready with your tailored message on the K-12, but you also have in your back pocket other things you can say if they bring up other things. Now, I purposely didn't start with this, but I want to be really clear, the E's are flexible. So what we've seen is some people will look at our list of the 5 E's and they'll say, oh my gosh, these are the exact 5 E's that we do, that we believe in, they're great. Or others may say, no, no, I've got a different E I'd like to use. What do you think about that? Or I'd like to take out one of your E's. What do you think about that? The answer is, I think it's great. The key is that it's flexible, that it works for you. I've had people look at the subcategories under the E's and they're like, these are perfect. And then I've had other people say, no, 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 I would like to add to those subcategories, or I would like to delete some subcategories, or I would like to just modify some things and change it a little bit. What do you think about that? Once again, the answer is that's great. I mean, that's what we want you to do. We want what we put together as being the default, subject to you changing it so it works for your library or your library system. So what are some of the other possible E's that people use from time to time? Well, it depends. In one way, if it's what we do, they start using other things like enrichment or exploration. And then at least one group has used economy instead of using employment and entrepreneurship. You also can talk about the E's in terms of other benefits libraries provide other than just what they do. So this could be equity, which is so huge always, and it's even become more in the news recently. Expertise, ease, and then everyone, it serves everyone who wants to use it, and libraries are ubiquitous, they're virtually everywhere. So you can also use those E's, but we want to make sure is that you're not having to look at a blank slate to start. You've got something you can start with and start rolling with right away, or if you want to tailor it and tweak it, absolutely go for it. That's what we want. We just wanted to make something that can really work. Someone once asked me, you know, what if the library wants to give disorganized messaging for advocacy? And I said they can do whatever they want, but here is what you need to know. Organization, persuasiveness, memorable is key. If you want to go in and be disorganized, don't expect a good result. But if you're organized, memorable, persuasive, everything can change, and you can be viewed in a very different way. So where the E's of libraries has been used, and it's been used in a number of different localities, it's been used in some states, it has worked. It's worked because what we're doing is we're putting our best foot forward. We don't want the reality perception gap. The perception should match the reality, and it can. But it can, but not by saying, oh my gosh, the other side, the parties we're trying to convince, they just don't understand this. As so many famous people have said, if they haven't learned it, you haven't taught it. So you've got to be there to teach it, to make sure it can work. And I want to say one other thing about the E's of libraries. You can also turn that into an interactive piece and use what's your E to talk to people as well. It's like, what's your E? We've had people from a wide variety of circumstances say, oh, my favorite E is this about what libraries do. So you can turn it into that. And by the way, as I said it early on, I've done a lot of work over many, many years trying to persuade the Federal Communications Commission on stuff. And when we worked with ALA with respect to E-rate and trying to get the fund greatly increased, which it did get increased by over $1 billion a year, when we went to the FCC and told them about the E's of libraries and started explaining what those 5 E's were, at least our E's, and how they got used, the FCC loved it, absolutely loved it, taking notes. They said, this is what we've always needed. We wanted a better way to understand what libraries do, and now we've got that. Thank you so much for putting it there. The FCC is not alone in this world. When we've talked to others who've been using the E's of libraries and that for their advocacy, it changes dynamic. You want to be, as I said, organized, persuasive, and memorable. So we've done more now. We've also created a book with Jillian Wentworth and myself writing that book on the E's of libraries, which we call Proving Your Library's Value, Persuasive, Organized, and Memorable Messaging. And here's the information regarding that. And I would like to turn it back over to Angela at this point. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you, Alan. A great point you made at the end. Advocacy does work. One of the key things I like about the E's of libraries messaging is that it really forces the user of the campaign to plan ahead. An essential tactic to advocacy is being ready. When a campaign or call to action is needed, you often don't have weeks to prepare messaging and stories and outcomes. And taking time to do that in the heat of the moment can result in a lack of traction in your messaging. Before we part, I want to share with you some of the ways you can be involved with GLA and advocate for libraries. GLA coordinates a library day at the Capitol where staff from various types of libraries work together to distribute an art print by artist Debbie Davis to every legislator. There's always lots of excitement in distributing these prints. Prints from previous years are always on display and framed in many of the offices at the Capitol. With the print in hand, legislators and office staff often greet these advocates with a smile as advocates petition for library needs. This day typically happens in February or March. I do not know what this day will look like in 2021, but I know we will do something. In our uncertain climate, the need for advocacy has grown. If you want to be involved, watch the GLA listserv or reach out to me directly and let me know you would like to participate. Discover call to actions or current need by accessing the GLA CQ Engage page. CQ Engage is a powerful advocacy software that allows organizations to educate, engage, mobilize, and grow grassroots advocacies at the local, state, or federal level. To access, go to the GLA website, gla.georgialibraries.org, and click on Advocacy at the top of the page. This will take you directly to the GLA Engage site. This page is updated during times of need and is a great place to discover current advocacy call to action in Georgia. I encourage you to set some time aside in the next few weeks to begin planning your advocacy tactics. Advocacy never stops and requires constant effort. But you do not need to advocate alone. Let's keep this conversation going and connect outside of this session. Please reach out to me and the Advocacy Committee if you need support, new ideas, or just want to talk something through. I would like to leave you with one last positive note, something I like to reflect upon when the weight of advocacy of library feels heavy. Remember what you are advocating for. Libraries are good, and they do good. And in some ways, advocating is easy because what we seek to increase support of is an institution central to our democracy and access to information. Libraries are important, and advocating for their future cannot be set aside or added to next month's to-do list. I want to thank Alan for joining us today and sharing all of his wonderful efforts with GLC and the GLA group. I want to thank all of you for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.